Sometimes the darkest stories aren't the ones we read in books or see in movies. They're the ones real people lived through. Moments when the ordinary suddenly turns terrifying. Today, I'm going to share a story about a town swallowed by darkness, a group of friends who faced an ancient evil and the price they paid to survive. This is a tale of shadows, secrets, and the thin line between fear and hope. Welcome to the story. I never thought a weekend getaway could turn into something I'd never forget, for all the wrong reasons. It started with me and 3 friends, Jake, Mia, and Chris. We'd all been burnt out from work and city life, desperate for a break. When Jake mentioned an old motel deep in the woods, it sounded perfect. The kind of place that wasn't on any tourist map, with a bit of mystery around it. The motel was called Whisper Pines, and it had been shut down for years. Jake found it online, some faded photos, some local legends about strange noises and weird lights. People said it was haunted, but that only made us more curious. We figured it'd be a cheap, fun weekend away from everything. The drive out was quiet at first, but as we left the main roads behind, the trees started to close in. The road got bumpier and narrower, twisting through dense woods that seemed to swallow up the sunlight. By the time we saw the motel, the sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the peeling paint and broken windows. "Looks worse in person," Mia said, pulling her jacket tighter around her. The sign swinging above the parking lot was rusted and barely hanging on. "Whisper Pines," it read, in faded letters, some missing entirely. We parked on the gravel, the crunch of stones under the tires breaking the heavy silence. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth, mixed with something faintly metallic that made my skin crawl. Jake was the first to step out of the car, stretching and grinning like this was some kind of adventure. "Come on, let's check it out before it gets too dark." I wasn't sure what I was expecting inside, but the lobby was worse than anything the photos showed. Dust coated every surface, and the smell of mold and old wood hit me the moment I stepped through the unlocked door. The front desk had a cracked bell, some broken keys hanging from rusted hooks behind it, and papers scattered everywhere. Faded hotel registers, yellowed flyers, and scraps of torn maps. "We should be careful," Mia said, her voice low. "This place feels off." But Jake laughed it off, already heading toward the hallway with his flashlight. "It's just old. Probably no one's been here in years." The hallway was long and dim, with peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards that moaned under our feet. We split up to find rooms, me, Mia, Chris, and Jake, each taking one. My room, number 7, was at the end of the hall. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and inside, the bed looked like it hadn't been slept in for decades. The sheets were thin and gray with dust, and the window didn't close all the way, letting in a cold, damp breeze that made me shiver. I unpacked my bag slowly, trying not to let the silence get to me. The walls seemed to press inward, and every creak or groan in the building sounded louder than it should. From down the hall, I heard Mia calling softly, "Hey, come look at this." I grabbed my jacket and followed her back to the lobby. She was staring at the old television mounted in the corner, the screen flickering to life on its own. Static buzzed and shadowy shapes moved across the screen like ghosts trapped in the glass. "Probably a loose connection," Jake said, but even his usual confident tone had a nervous edge. We watched the screen for a moment, the flickering shapes almost hypnotic, before the power in the whole building cut out with a sudden pop. Darkness swallowed the motel except for the pale glow from our flashlights. "We should stick together," Chris said, his voice low. We spent the next hour exploring what little was left open, the old dining area, the broken pool outside, and the overgrown gardens. Each place felt colder than the last, as if the motel itself was alive and watching us. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind whistle through cracks in the walls. Somewhere down the hall, I thought I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. My heart raced every time the floor creaked. Then came the knocking. Soft at first, like a gentle tap. Then louder, like someone knocking on my door. I didn't want to open it, but after a few minutes, curiosity won. I cracked the door open just enough to peek out. The hallway was empty, but the knocking continued, coming from the other side of the hall. I grabbed my phone, trying for a signal. Nothing, just the spinning wheel of no service. I called out, "Is someone there?" No answer. The knocking stopped. I went back to bed, pulling the covers tight, but I wasn't alone. I lay awake in room 7 for hours, staring at the cracked ceiling as the silence wrapped around me. The knocking that had haunted the night before was gone, but what replaced it was worse. A thick, heavy quiet that felt like it was watching, waiting. The old motel creaked and groaned as if breathing slowly in the dark. Every shift of the walls and every whistle of wind through the broken window made my skin crawl. I tried to convince myself it was just the building settling, just the wind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew something else was there. Something I couldn't see, but felt with every nerve. I turned onto my side and tried to close my eyes, but every shadow seemed to stretch longer, and every whisper from outside sounded like voices, soft, urgent, calling my name. Around midnight, exhaustion finally dragged me down, and I fell into a restless, shallow sleep. Then I woke with a start to a scraping sound. It was soft, slow, like nails dragging across the wooden floor just outside my door. My heart jumped so hard I thought it might burst. I reached over and grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand, switching it on with trembling hands. The beam shook in my grip as I cracked the door open, peering into the dark hallway. "Hello?" I whispered. Nothing, but silence. The scraping came again, louder this time, coming from the far end near the stairwell. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath, and stepped out. The floorboards creaked beneath me as I moved, the beam of light dancing across peeling wallpaper and faded, crooked pictures on the walls. The basement door was at the end of the hall, shut tight and old. The scraping noise was definitely coming from behind it. I stood frozen for a moment, hand hovering over the doorknob. It felt colder than anything else in the building, an icy pulse of something alive and dark. Then the door creaked open just a sliver, like it was inviting me in. My first instinct was to slam it shut and hide, but a strange mix of fear and curiosity pushed me forward. The stairs groaned under my weight as I stepped down into the basement. The air was thick with dampness, smelling of mold, rust, and something metallic I couldn't place. The flashlight beam caught glimpses of broken furniture, spider webs, and rusty pipes lining the stone walls. I squinted, trying to make out shapes in the gloom. And then I saw it. A figure hunched in the corner, barely moving. I froze, heart hammering. Its back was turned to me, shoulders shaking, like it was sobbing silently. "Hey," I whispered, voice trembling. "Are you okay?" No answer. I stepped closer, and suddenly my foot brushed something cold and soft on the floor. I looked down, flashlight shining on a pale, lifeless hand stretched out on the concrete. I stumbled back in shock. The figure turned toward me slowly. It wasn't human. Its eyes were empty, black holes. Skin stretched tight over sharp bones, almost translucent. Its mouth opened in a silent scream. Or maybe it didn't have a mouth at all, but a horrible whisper escaped. "Leave!" I didn't wait for more. My legs felt like lead, but I ran. Up the stairs, out of the basement, slamming the door behind me. My friends had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the noise. "What happened?" Mia asked, eyes wide. "There's something in the basement. Something not right." Jake laughed nervously. "Probably just a raccoon." Chris shook his head, pale and serious. "We need to get out of here." We agreed to pack and leave first thing in the morning. But as we passed the lobby, the old TV flickered on. First, just static. Then a dark figure appeared behind us in the hallway, so close I could almost feel its breath. We spun around, flashlights darting, but the hallway was empty. The motel was watching us. The rest of the night was a nightmare of creaks and whispers. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer. Every sound made me jump. Mia and Chris stayed close to me, both too scared to sleep. Jake tried to joke, but his smile was brittle. At around 3 a.m., a tapping started at the window, soft, deliberate. I looked over, but all I saw were the trees outside swaying in the wind. The tapping stopped suddenly, leaving an awful silence. Was it the motel, or something else waiting just beyond the window? When dawn finally broke, the fog outside was thick and heavy. We packed quickly, eager to leave, but the motel felt like it was tightening its grip, colder, darker. As we loaded the car, I caught one last look at the lobby window. A pale face stared back at me from inside the shadows. It smiled. The sun was barely up when we finally pulled away from the motel. The gravel crunching beneath the tires was the last reminder of that cursed place. We expected relief, the fresh, open road to erase the nightmare behind us. But the thick, low fog hugging the horizon swallowed the morning light like a black hole, turning everything around us into a gray, shifting blur. Inside the car, the air was heavy. Mia sat by the window, her fingers nervously tracing the condensation gathering there. Chris kept his eyes fixed on the windshield, jaw clenched tight. Jake, normally the loudest and most carefree among us, was quiet, a haunted look in his eyes. I gripped the steering wheel, forcing myself to focus on the road, but my mind kept drifting back to the basement, the hollow eyes, the whisper that told me to leave. "We need to get as far away from that place as possible," I finally said, breaking the silence. "Yeah," Mia agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anywhere but there." But as the miles rolled under the tires, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us, something cold and patient. After a couple of hours, we stopped at a small gas station tucked just off the highway. It looked like a relic from a forgotten time. The faded sign creaked in the wind, the pump handles coated in rust. The fluorescent lights inside flickered with a nervous buzz, casting eerie shadows on the peeling linoleum floor. The old man behind the counter gave us a suspicious glance as we paid for the gas. "This place feels like it's been stuck in time," Mia muttered as we climbed back into the car. Chris nodded, running his hand through his hair, like we stepped into a different world. I tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. Back on the road, the fog thickened, swirling around us in heavy, wet curtains. The trees lining the highway seemed to lean inward, their twisted branches reaching like claws to snatch us from the road. Then I noticed something strange. The highway signs we passed were old and worn, some bent out of shape. Worse, the names on them didn't match anything I could find on my phone's GPS or the paper map I had pulled from the glove box. "Guys, does this road look familiar to you?" I asked, squinting through the fog. Jake shook his head. "Not at all." Mia frowned. "This doesn't make sense. None of this is on the map." Chris leaned forward, tracing the faded signs. "It's like we're on a ghost road." My stomach twisted with a cold dread. Suddenly the car sputtered, the engine stalled, and the dashboard lights flickered out. "Shit," Jake cursed, turning the key. Nothing. We coasted to the side of the road, the fog swallowing us whole. I climbed out, my boots hitting the cracked pavement. The thick air tasted damp and heavy, like we'd crossed into another world. "Let's not stay here," Mia said, her voice trembling. We grabbed our bags and started walking, hoping to find help or at least a signal on our phones. But the fog twisted around us, erasing the road behind and ahead. The trees closed in, black and gnarled, their branches scratching against each other in a sound like distant screams. "Which way?" Chris asked, voice cracking. "No idea," I admitted. Every direction looked the same, a wall of white and shadow. Then we heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, rolling through the trees like thunder. We froze, hearts pounding. The growl grew louder, closer, something massive moving just beyond the fog. "Run!" Jake yelled. We sprinted back toward the car, branches slapping our faces, roots threatening to trip us. When we reached the car, I slammed the door shut and locked the windows. The growling circled, impossibly close, but we couldn't see through the mist. Then a sudden, violent slam against the side of the car rattled the entire vehicle. We screamed, pressing ourselves against the windows, terror making time slow. The growling faded, and the fog began to lift like a curtain being pulled away. Outside, the trees were just trees again, the road straight and normal, no twisted branches or strange signs. Jake exhaled shakily. "What was that?" "I don't know," I said, "but I don't want to find out." We tried the engine again, and it roared to life. The drive out of the fog felt surreal, as if we had stepped out of a nightmare. But even as the miles stretched out, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was still lurking just behind us, waiting for the next chance. Hours later, we found a small town and pulled into a quiet motel. The sign outside was old and faded, but welcoming. We wanted to rest, to feel safe for a few hours. But the shadows here were long, the night cold. And when I looked out the window, I thought I saw something, a pale face, watching. I shut the curtains fast. Sleep wouldn't come easy. The storytelling tone with the normal speed. The motel room was small and stale, filled with a faint smell of mildew and dust that seemed to cling to every surface. The single lamp by the bed gave off a weak, flickering glow, barely pushing back the thick shadows that clung to the corners. After the horrors we'd faced on that fog-choked road, none of us could settle down. Every creak of the old radiator, every distant sound outside, the hum of a car, the gentle rustling of the curtains sent shivers crawling down my spine. Mia was the first to break the silence. She sat on the edge of the bed, eyes wide and glassy with exhaustion, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of a threadbare blanket. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she whispered, voice barely audible. "I keep seeing things, hearing things that aren't there." Chris rubbed his face, exhaustion etched deep beneath his eyes. "Same here. Last night I thought I heard voices outside the window. Soft whispers, but I couldn't make out the words." He gave a nervous laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Probably just the wind messing with us. Jake, usually the loudest and bravest among us, shrugged and forced a shaky smile. "Yeah, it's just the wind," he said, though even he sounded unsure. I kept staring out the window, mind spinning. "Do you guys feel like we're being watched?" I asked, my voice low. They all nodded slowly. Mia's eyes flicked nervously back toward the window, as if expecting to see something, someone waiting there. The night stretched on painfully slow. Every few minutes I jolted awake, heart pounding in my chest, convinced I heard footsteps outside or felt a cold breath brush my neck. But every time I looked, there was only darkness, deep, empty darkness, swallowing the world. Around 3 in the morning, a soft scratching sound came from the door, It was slow, deliberate, like nails scraping lightly against wood. My blood turned to ice. I held my breath, waiting for the sound to stop, but it didn't. The scratching dragged on, like a warning, tightening a cold knot in my stomach. Finally, I whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. Then the scratching stopped. The rest of the night passed in a blur of uneasy silence and broken, restless dreams. When dawn finally came, we all looked like shadows of ourselves. The motel breakfast room was empty except for us, and the oppressive quiet was just as thick as the night had been. We avoided each other's eyes, each of us lost deep inside our own thoughts. The motel felt less like a shelter and more like a prison. After a cold, wordless breakfast, we agreed to stay inside until the sun was fully up. None of us wanted to wander the empty streets of that strange town while still so shaken. But I couldn't stay in that stale room. I needed fresh air. I stepped outside alone. The town was eerily silent. Most of the shops were shuttered, their windows cracked and dusty. The sidewalks cracked and buckled with weeds pushing through every crack. Not a single person was in sight. I wandered down the empty street, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. Then, pinned to a telephone pole, I spotted a weathered wooden sign. The paint was chipped and faded, but I could still make out the words, "Turn back." I frowned. It wasn't a typical road sign. It felt like a desperate warning, maybe carved years ago, left to decay but still pleading. I snapped a photo and hurried back to the motel. Inside, I showed the others. "Turn back," Jake said, his voice barely a whisper. "That's not good." Mia paled. "It's like the town itself is trying to keep us out, or keep us here." Chris frowned deeply. "Maybe there's something here, something that doesn't want us around." The day dragged on. Shadows seemed to grow longer, noises felt sharper. The feeling of being watched never left us. That night, the tension snapped. Around midnight, the power suddenly cut out. The entire motel was swallowed by thick, suffocating darkness. We fumbled for flashlights, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give away our presence. I swept my beam down the hallway and froze. There, outside the window, were dozens of glowing eyes. Pairs of faint, flickering lights blinking slowly, deliberately, watching us from the dark. We all held our breath. The eyes blinked once, twice, then vanished, swallowed by the night. A cold grip closed around my heart. We locked every door, pulled every curtain tight, and huddled together, too terrified to speak. Sleep was impossible. Morning finally arrived, but none of us felt relief. We were hollowed out, drained. No one spoke of the eyes or the power outage, but all of us felt the same terrifying truth. We were trapped in a place that wasn't meant for us. One thing was certain, we were not alone. And whatever watched us from the dark had no intention of letting us leave. The sun that morning struggled through thick gray clouds, casting a dull, sickly light over the empty streets. We sat together in the motel room, wrapped in silence heavier than the stale air around us. The unease was suffocating. No birds chirping, no distant traffic, nothing but a cold stillness that pressed against the windows. Even the faint hum of the fluorescent light overhead seemed too loud in the quiet. Jake was the first to break the silence. His voice was rough, as if he hadn't slept. "We can't just sit here waiting for something to get us. We need to find out what this place is." Mia nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched a coffee mug. "But where? Everyone's gone. The streets are empty. And those eyes last night? I don't know if I can handle that again." Chris ran his hair through his eyes, looking worn down. "We have to try. Staying here isn't an option." I swallowed hard, trying to push down the rising panic. The knot in my stomach tightened, but I knew he was right. We needed answers. After packing what little we had left, we stepped back into the abandoned town. The air was thick and cold, like the breath of something waiting just out of sight. The streets stretched empty before us, the cracked pavement overrun with weeds poking through every crevice. Not a single soul was around. Our plan was simple: find the library. It had to hold some clue about the town's past, some record that explained what we'd stumbled into. The building was a few blocks away, an aging stone structure with grimy windows and a heavy oak door hanging on rusty hinges. Inside, the library was a tomb of dust and silence. Shelves sagged under the weight of decayed books, their pages yellowed and brittle. Cobwebs hung like curtains in the corners. The air smelled musty and forgotten, as if the world had stopped here decades ago. We split up, scanning shelves and flipping through old records, desperate for any scrap of information. Mia's voice broke through the quiet. "Hey, over here, I found something." We gathered around her where she sat cross-legged on the floor, holding an old leather-bound journal, the cover cracked and worn. I carefully opened it, revealing pages filled with hurried handwriting. The journal belonged to Samuel Gray, a local who had lived here long ago. As I read aloud, the words grew darker with every entry. Talks of strange noises outside the town at night, shadows that moved of their own will, and eyes that watched from the woods. One passage sent a shiver through me. The eyes come when the sun sets, silent and unblinking. The walls whisper secrets no one should hear. Those who listen too long lose themselves to the dark. I looked up. Whispering walls? Lost to the dark? What does that mean? Chris's voice was low and grim. Sounds like the town itself is alive or haunted. Mia swallowed hard, staring out the dusty window. Maybe the town doesn't want anyone here. Suddenly, a faint sound drifted through the room, a low murmur, like soft voices whispering just beyond understanding. The walls seemed to pulse with the sound, as if breathing. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. They nodded, eyes wide and nervous. The whispering grew louder for a moment, before fading into silence again. We left the library, the eerie quiet outside pressing against us like a weight. The air felt charged with something dangerous. We decided to make our way to the church at the top of the hill, the tallest building in town. Maybe there we could find more clues. The path up was rough, cracked stone steps tangled with roots. At the summit, the church stood like a giant shadow against the gray sky. Its stained glass windows were shattered, and the wooden door hung crooked, groaning in the wind. Inside, dust floated in the dim light. Rows of broken pews lined the floor, and the altar was coated in years of grime. But what caught our attention was the pulpit, carved with strange symbols that seemed older than the building itself. Mia traced the carvings with trembling fingers. These looked like warnings, or maybe protections. Chris crouched closer, trying to decipher the strange runes. Whatever they mean, this place was important. The whispering returned, louder this time, swirling around us like cold breath. The walls seemed alive, pressing in, murmuring secrets we weren't meant to hear. We stumbled back, hearts racing, the fear thick enough to choke. Jake's voice cracked. We should leave, now. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying distant voices, pleading, desperate, almost human, but twisted. We hurried down the hill, every shadow stretching like fingers trying to grab us. Back at the motel, the whispering followed us, seeping through the walls like poison. Sleep was impossible. The voices haunted our dreams, weaving webs of fear. One night, Mia vanished. We woke to find her bed empty, the window wide open. A cold breeze stirred the curtains. Outside, faint footprints led into the inky darkness. We chased after her, calling her name, but the only answer was the whispering walls and the silent eyes watching us from the shadows. The dawn crept slowly over the horizon, its weak light barely cutting through the heavy gray clouds. The motel room felt colder than before, as if the chill of night had seeped into the walls and refused to leave. I woke first, a strange silence settling over the place like a thick fog. At once, my heart dropped. Mia was nowhere to be seen. Her bed was a tangled mess of sheets, but empty. The window next to it was wide open, curtains fluttering softly in the morning breeze. I swallowed hard and nudged Jake awake. "Jake, Mia's gone." His eyes snapped open, and he sat up fast. "Gone? What do you mean?" "She's not here. The window's open, and there are footprints outside," I said, pointing to the muddy ground below. Chris was awake now, rubbing his face with his hands. "We need to find her, now." The three of us stepped outside into the cold morning air. The town lay silent and still, the streets deserted, as if frozen in time. The faintest whisper of wind rustled through the dead leaves, but no other sound disturbed the eerie quiet. We called out Mia's name, our voices trembling with growing fear. The fog clung low, curling around our ankles as we followed the trail of footprints that led away from the motel towards the dense woods that edged the town. Every step into the forest seemed to draw a deeper chill. The twisted trees loomed over us like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches weaving into a roof of darkness. The silence was oppressive, heavier than the thick fog pressing against our skin. I shivered, feeling the weight of those unseen eyes watching from the darkness between the trees. The glowing orbs from the night before flickered into view, countless and unblinking, reflecting our flashlight beams like a sea of cold fire. "We have to keep moving," I urged, though my voice was shaking. Branches tore at our clothes and scratched our faces as we pushed forward, the forest growing darker and more tangled with every step. Suddenly, a flash of pale skin flickered through the trees ahead. "Mia!" Jake called, his voice breaking with hope. But there was no answer, just the whispering, now rising into a chorus of desperate voices swirling around us. The path opened into a clearing. In its center stood an old stone well, moss-covered and crumbling with age. The whispers seemed to pour from its depths, the voices growing louder, more urgent. Jake aimed his flashlight into the black mouth of the well. "It's so deep, I can't see the bottom." Then, faint eyes appeared, glowing, countless, staring back from the darkness. Their cold light seemed to pierce into our souls. The ground trembled suddenly, a low rumble vibrating through the earth beneath us. "The well," said Chris, voice tight with fear. "It's a gateway." The whispering exploded into a roar. The trees bent inward, their branches like skeletal hands to trap us in a cage of shadows. "We need to get out, now!" I shouted. We turned and ran blindly through the tangled woods, branches whipping our skin, the sound of countless voices chasing us. Back at the motel, our breaths ragged and hearts pounding, we slammed the doors shut and barricaded the windows. But the whispering never stopped. It seeped through every crack, wrapped around us like a cold shroud, invading our minds. Mia was gone. The motel room felt colder than before, like the chill of the night had settled into the very walls. Hours had passed since Mia vanished, but the silence in the room wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, oppressive, like a presence pressing down on our shoulders, watching us, waiting. The whispering hadn't stopped. It seeped through every crack, slipping beneath the door and curling around us like smoke. The voices were low and distant, full of hunger and sadness, impossible to ignore. Even though none of us wanted to admit it, the dark truth hung between us. Mia was gone, taken by whatever haunted this cursed town. And now, we were next. Jake finally broke the silence, his voice tight. "We can't just sit here waiting. We need to do something, anything." Chris nodded. "We have to figure out what that well is. It's the center of all this. Maybe if we find a way to close it, we can stop it." I bit my lip, feeling the weight of their words. It all felt hopeless, but I knew they were right. The well was the key, a dark doorway to something older than any of us could understand. We grabbed our flashlights and backpacks, stuffing in whatever we thought might help: a pocket knife, a lighter, a small bottle of water. Our phones had no signal, and the motel's landline was dead. We were completely cut off. The sun was setting, the sky a bruised purple, and the fog was thickening around the town like a living thing. Outside, the air was sharp and cold, and the streetlights flickered weakly in the growing gloom. The church was our only lead. It had been the start of everything: the symbols, the strange carvings, the creeping dread. If there was a way to fight back, it would be there. The heavy wooden doors creaked as we pushed them open, and a stale, musty smell greeted us. Dust motes floated in the shafts of fading light that spilled through the stained glass windows, casting eerie patterns across the cracked stone floor. The silence inside was different, deeper, thicker. The walls seemed to hold their breath. Chris moved toward the altar, brushing his fingers over the carved eye symbol etched into the pulpit. He said, "There's something here, something we missed." Jake pointed to a narrow staircase leading down to the basement crypt. "We have to check down there." The steps groaned under our weight as we descended, the air growing colder and damper with each step. The whispering followed us, louder now, more urgent, more desperate. At the bottom, the crypt opened into a small chamber lined with ancient stones. The walls were carved with more of the strange symbols, dark stains marking the cracks and crevices. It smelled like earth and decay. In the center was a wooden grate, slightly askew. Chris knelt and pushed it aside, revealing a deep pit that plunged into blackness. The whispering roared in our ears, filling every corner of the chamber. Jake shone his flashlight down the hole, but the beam vanished quickly into the abyss. From the darkness, glowing eyes blinked back at us, countless and cold. A low growl rumbled from deep below, and the ground trembled beneath our feet. "We're not alone," Jake said, voice tight. I swallowed hard, the horror sinking in. This was no ordinary well. It was a gateway, a door to a world where something ancient and hungry waited. Suddenly, the symbols on the walls began to glow faintly with an eerie, sickly light. The air pulsed around us, thick and suffocating. Chris's voice was barely a whisper. "We need to close this before it's too late." But how? The pit seemed endless, a bottomless void that swallowed our light and our hope. The growling grew louder, echoing off the stone walls. Shapes moved in the shadows, dark forms with glowing eyes watching, waiting. We didn't have time to hesitate. We scrambled back up the stairs, the oppressive presence chasing us. The moment we reached the church's main floor, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. Outside, the fog was even thicker now. It wrapped around the town like a suffocating shroud, muting every sound except the whispering voices that seemed to come from the very earth. Back at the motel, we barricaded the doors and windows again, but the feeling of being watched never left us. Shadows flickered just out of sight, and the whispering carried on, endless, haunting, and full of promise. Mia was gone, and the darkness was growing stronger. We barely slept that night. The whispering never stopped, slipping through the cracks like cold fingers curling around our minds. Every creak of the old motel, every gust of wind rattling the windows made us jump. Even in the small hours when exhaustion should have won, the voices kept us restless, haunted. The fog outside refused to lift. Instead, it grew thicker, heavier, pressing down on the town like a suffocating shroud. The streetlights flickered weakly in the mist, their dull glow barely cutting through the haze. The silence around us felt unnatural, as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting. Jake paced the room, restless and tense. We can't wait any longer. Mia's still out there. We have to go back to the well. There has to be something there, some way to fight this. Chris nodded, face pale but resolute. I agree. That well, it's the source of all this evil. We need to face it head on, or none of us will make it out. I wanted to protest. I wanted to stay inside, safe, far away from that pit of shadows and death. But deep down, I knew they were right. The well was the key, a dark door to something older and more terrifying than we could imagine. If we didn't confront it now, the darkness would swallow us whole. We prepared ourselves as best we could, packed some snacks, filled water bottles, grabbed flashlights with fresh batteries. We took anything that might be a weapon, a baseball bat, a heavy metal pipe we'd found outside. Our phones had no signal. The motel's landline was dead. We were alone, completely cut off. The night was thick with fog when we stepped outside. The world felt muted, colors drained to gray and black. The street was empty, the silence only broken by the soft crunch of leaves beneath our boots and the constant whispering that followed us, an invisible presence at our backs. The forest loomed ahead, dark and forbidding. Branches clawed at the sky, tangled like the fingers of ghosts. We took a deep breath and stepped into the shadows. The path to the well was barely visible under a thick carpet of damp leaves. The air was heavy, wet with the smell of earth and rot. Every step felt like sinking into a nightmare. Suddenly, Jake stopped and pointed. Look! Carved into the trunk of a tree was the same eye symbol we'd seen before, but this one was fresh. The bark split open as if clawed or burned. The edges of the symbol glistened with something dark, like dried blood. Chris knelt down, tracing the marks with trembling fingers. Someone, or something, wants us to find this. Or maybe it's a warning. The whispering grew louder here, echoing between the trees like 1,000 voices, whispering secrets we weren't meant to hear. Faces flickered in the shadows, twisted and silent, eyes glowing with cold fire. They watched us, waited. We pushed forward, hearts pounding, muscles tense. The forest seemed alive, the branches bending and twisting as if reaching for us. When we finally reached the clearing, the well stood like a black hole at its center. Ancient stones, slick with moss and stained with dark patches, formed its edge. The air was thick with a terrible energy, a weight pressing down on us. Chris stepped forward, shining his flashlight down the well. The beam vanished quickly into an abyss so deep it swallowed light and hope alike. "We have to go deeper," Chris said, voice steady but tight. "How?" I asked, swallowing a lump in my throat. "We can't see the bottom." Jake pointed to a frayed rope tied to a nearby tree. It looked old, worn thin by time and weather, but it was our only option. One by one, we climbed down into the well's depths. The air grew colder with each step, damp and heavy. The walls were slick with moisture, and the whispering turned into voices, pleading, warning, begging, the voices of those who had been taken before us. At the bottom, the well opened into a small underground chamber. The stone walls were carved with more of the strange symbols, twisted faces, and shadowy figures. The eyes watched us from every surface, unblinking and eternal. In the center of the chamber lay a cracked stone altar, dark stains marking its surface. On it rested a thick, leather-bound book, heavy with dust and time. Chris reached for the book, and the whispering erupted into a furious roar. The chamber trembled, dust falling from the cracked ceiling above. "We don't have much time," I said, voice barely a whisper as I grabbed the book and opened it. The pages were filled with strange symbols, drawings of rituals, sacrifices, and warnings scrawled in an ancient hand. This is a record of everything that happened here," Chris said, reading over my shoulder. "The well is a gateway to another world, a place where shadows live and feed on fear." Jake's face went pale. "And it says the only way to close it is to perform a ritual, one that requires a sacrifice." I swallowed hard, the weight of those words settling like a stone in my stomach. "We can't let Mia be that sacrifice." The whispering turned into a scream that echoed off the stone walls. Shadows flickered in the corners of our vision, moving closer. "We have to do something, now," Chris said, closing the book and locking eyes with us. We began to prepare for the ritual, reciting the ancient words we could piece together. The air thickened around us, the shadows writhing like living things eager to feed. Suddenly, a figure appeared from the darkness, pale, twisted, eyes glowing like the ones in the well. It was Mia, but something was horribly wrong. Her eyes were empty, dark pools reflecting nothing but cold hunger. "Mia!" I whispered, stepping forward. She didn't respond. Instead, she smiled, a cruel, empty smile that sent a chill down my spine. The shadows surged forward, the chamber collapsing around us. The ritual was our last hope. If we failed, the darkness would claim us all, the town, the well, and the girl who had once been Mia. The moment Mia appeared in the dim light of the chamber, my breath caught in my throat. But it wasn't really Mia anymore. Not the girl we had laughed with, shared secrets with, the one who had been with us since childhood. This was something else. Her skin was pale and cold, her eyes empty voids that reflected nothing but a dark, unfathomable hunger. The smile on her lips was cruel and twisted, the kind of smile that makes your blood run cold. I could feel the weight of despair pressing down on me like a heavy stone, settling deep in my chest, threatening to crush what little hope I had left. Chris stepped forward cautiously, voice calm yet low, as if speaking any louder might shatter what little sanity remained. "Mia, we're here to help you. We're going to close this, whatever this is." Her smile didn't falter. It grew wider, a dreadful mockery. "Help me," she whispered, voice echoing eerily in the chamber. "You're too late." The air around us thickened, turning colder and heavier, as if the shadows themselves had turned into a living force. The darkness curled around her like smoke, pulsating with a sinister life of its own. Her form flickered, wavering between the Mia we knew and something twisted and monstrous, her limbs elongating and distorting, her eyes burning with a cold, otherworldly fire. Jake gripped the metal pipe in his trembling hands, eyes darting between Mia and the crumbling walls of the chamber. "We can't hesitate. We have to act, now." I swallowed hard, heart pounding in my ears, and stepped forward beside Chris. The ancient book still lay open on the stone altar, its pages faintly glowing with cryptic symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. We didn't understand everything written in those pages, but we knew it was our only chance to stop this nightmare. Chris took a deep breath and began reciting the incantation again, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around us. The words echoed against the stone walls, and the air vibrated with power. The shadows writhed and recoiled, pushed back by the invisible force the ritual summoned. But the thing wearing Mia's face wasn't going to give up without a fight. In a sudden blur, she lunged at Chris, her movements unnatural and terrifyingly fast. Her fingers twisted into sharp claws, slashing through the air where he had just stood moments before. Chris barely dodged, his foot slipping on the slick, moss-covered stones as he scrambled backwards. "Get back!" I yelled, grabbing Jake's arm. "We have to finish this ritual now, or it's over for all of us." The entire well trembled violently, dust and small stones falling from the cracked ceiling. The chamber seemed to shrink, walls closing in like the jaws of some great beast hungry for its prey. The darkness was fighting with everything it had, desperate to hold on to its prize. Chris's voice faltered for a moment as exhaustion and fear gripped him, but then he pushed through, forcing the incantation louder and stronger, his words ringing out like a battle cry. The shadows shrieked, a sound so piercing and unnatural it felt like it was tearing at my very soul. Mia's monstrous form screamed too, a sound twisted and unhuman, echoing endlessly through the chamber. Then suddenly, the book on the altar burst into a blinding light, a pure, brilliant white that flooded the chamber with warmth and color for the first time since we had descended into this nightmare. Mia screamed again, a sound filled with both agony and desperation, before she collapsed onto the cold stone floor. The shadows recoiled, shrinking back like smoke scattered by a sudden gust of wind until they were gone entirely. For a long moment, there was only silence. I dropped to my knees, my heart hammering painfully as I stared at her, the girl beneath the darkness. Slowly her eyes blinked, confusion and fear flickering back into their depths. "Help me," she whispered, voice fragile and breaking. Jake and Chris rushed to her side, supporting her as she struggled to rise. The oppressive weight of the darkness was lifting, but the scars it had left were deep and raw. Her face was pale and drawn, haunted by something no one should ever endure. Outside the well, the fog was thinning. The thick veil of silence that had choked the town for days was finally beginning to break. The distant call of a bird sounded faint but clear, a tiny sliver of hope in a place where hope had all but vanished. We helped Mia back toward the surface, every step heavy with exhaustion but filled with relief. But even as we climbed, the feeling lingered, a sense that this victory was fragile, that the darkness we had fought was only resting, biding its time. The well was sealed for now, but its hunger remained, waiting for the moment to return. The town held its breath, waiting with us for the next shadow to emerge. We emerged from the well as the first pale light of dawn began to stretch its fingers across the sky. The fog that had hung over the town like a suffocating blanket was finally starting to lift. The suffocating silence that had blanketed every street corner, every abandoned house, was beginning to break. For a fleeting moment, it felt like the nightmare that had gripped us for so long was finally over, that the darkness had been pushed back, sealed away, and forgotten. But as I looked around, the air still felt thick and heavy with something unseen. It wasn't just the dampness from the morning dew or the faint chill in the breeze, it was something deeper, something waiting patiently just beyond the edges of sight. The quiet was not peaceful, it was fragile, like the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for the next shadow to fall. Mia leaned heavily against Jake's shoulder as we made our way back through the sleepy streets. Her steps were unsteady, but she was alive. Her eyes, once hollow and void of life, now held a flicker of recognition. The girl we knew was still there beneath the scars the well had left on her soul, though the darkness had clearly left its mark. Her face was pale and drawn, and every now and then I saw her flinch at some invisible memory or pain. Chris was the first to break the silence, his voice rough but full of cautious hope. "We did it! We closed the well. For now." I nodded in agreement, but the truth felt heavier than relief. The ancient book we carried, the whispers we had heard, the shadows that had tried to consume us, told a story far bigger and darker than any of us had imagined. The well was just one door among many, a single gateway to a shadow world that fed on fear and despair. How many other towns are like this? I wondered aloud. How many other people are trapped by the same darkness? Chris shrugged, his face grim. Too many, probably. That book, it mentions others. Wells, gateways, shadows waiting to be fed. We may have won this fight, but the war's far from over. Jake, ever the optimist, forced a small smile. Then we'll be ready next time. We've seen the darkness. We've faced it. Mia's voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke, breaking into my thoughts. What happens to me now? She searched our eyes, wide and filled with fear. Will I ever be normal again? Jake reached out and took her hand gently, squeezing it reassuringly. You're safe now. We'll get through this, together. But even as those words left his lips, I knew the truth wasn't so simple. The darkness wasn't just some visitor we could wave goodbye. It was a stain that had settled deep within her, something that would take time, and maybe a kind of strength none of us fully understood, to heal. Over the next few days, the town slowly began to come back to life. People returned cautiously to their homes, some shaken to their core, others too scared or ashamed to speak of what they had seen or heard. The streets, once empty and haunted by silence, filled with the sound of footsteps, whispered conversations, and the distant hum of life trying to reclaim itself. The fog was gone. The eerie silence was gone. But the memory of the darkness remained like a shadow clinging to every corner, every cracked sidewalk and shuttered window. I found myself drawn to the places where the darkness had been strongest, the forest edges, the old abandoned buildings, the places where the wind seemed to carry whispers just beyond hearing. Sometimes in those quiet moments, the whispering returned, not from the sealed well, but from the very edges of the town itself. The voices were faint, like a ghost's breath on your neck, but they were there. The darkness was patient. One chilly evening, I stood outside the motel, staring toward the horizon where the dark forest met the dying light of day. A sudden chill ran down my spine, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a shadow shift just beyond the reach of the street lamp's glow. It was a subtle movement, barely perceptible, but enough to make me step back and shiver. The well had taken so much from us, Mia, our innocence, our peace of mind, but it had also given us something, an unshakable warning, a glimpse into a world far darker than we ever thought possible. We survived the darkness that clawed from the depths below, but the world was full of shadows, and shadows have a way of waiting to be fed, waiting for the next unwary soul. We sealed the well, yes, but the ancient book reminded us that there were others, other gateways like this one, scattered across the world, in places forgotten by time and buried beneath fear. And the thought sent a shiver down my spine. As the town slowly healed, we stayed close, watching each other, ready for the next sign of trouble. The bond forged in that darkness was stronger than any fear. We knew the fight wasn't over. Not really. But for now, we had each other, and that was enough. The well was closed, but the darkness never truly leaves. It waits. And when the time is right, it will rise. The darkness may have been pushed back, but it's never truly gone. It waits, patient and hungry, lurking just beyond the edges of the light. The world is full of shadows, and some doors should never be opened. If you ever feel that chill or hear a whisper when no one's there, remember this story and stay careful. because sometimes the past is never really behind us. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay safe in the light.